Okay, good morning, everybody. As we start the new class in the morning, the Chumash class in the morning, I want to thank the big crowd who arrived today in the morning, and asking everybody to come back home, come back to Chabad, and learn together. Okay, so this class is a Sikh of the Rebbe on the portion of Pinchas. If you don't have the book, I have still books in the Chabad. You can come pick it up today. This is the book for the next couple of months, till we start the new the Bereshis again. So come and get a book, and you will enjoy this class. Let me just make sure. Is the air on? Yeah. Okay, so this is a beautiful Sikh of the Rebbe, and it starts on page number 3 in the book, and we hopefully you have a Chumash with you. If you have a Chumash with you, that will also help you out in understanding this class. It's truly fascinating if you listen to the Torah, if you've been listening to the portion, this portion of Pinchas is one of the most famous portions in the Torah. Because this is a portion we read every holiday. Portion of Pinchas. We read it every Rosh Chodesh. We read it every holiday because it has within it the laws of the holidays. Now, you'll see in the Torah that there are not only one place that there's the law of the holidays, but there's the law of the holidays in this week's Parsha and also in the book of Leviticus, where over there deals with the Karbanis, also has there the law of the holidays. So we're going to try to understand, the Rebbe is going to try to explain something, a fascinating thing, that why do we need to have two places, the laws of the holidays? Why do you need it in two places? You have one place in Vayikra when they built the Mishkan, which would happen right after the Mount Sinai, and then this week's Parsha, which is seemingly 40 years later, right before the Jewish people are going into the land of Israel. So let's start off with Bamidbar. If you're chapter 29, verse number 1. So you have it in the text number 1a. But if you have a Chumash near you, go to Bamidbar, chapter 29, verse number 1. I have a Chumash and we can do it together. So chapter 29, verse number 1. You got it, everybody?
No. What page is it?
20, it's
Well, in this book, in this Chabad Chumash, it's on page number 1062.
67, no?
1060.
No, but you want number 29.
Chapter 29?
You said 29.
I'm sorry, you're right, I'm sorry. Chapter 29, I got the wrong page.
1067.
Oh.
1067. You're right. Verse 1. 1066. Okay. 1066, 1067. B'chodesh Hashvi, the verse says, in the 7th month, Be'echad HaChodesh, in the first of the month, Mikra Kodesh Yelachem, it should be called a day of calling to you. Kamalechas Avodah Loisasu, all work you shall not do. Yom Trua Yelachem, it should be called the day of calling, the day of the shofar, right? Yeah, you have a question already? We just started.
Shouldn't it be the 14th day? Why? It's the first day of Nisan, is not.
This is the Rosh Hashanah. You blow the shofar on the Rosh Hashanah. On the 7th of the month, on the first day of the month, is Rosh Hashanah. Is the day, the day of the month. And in the 7th verse, you have the day, you have the Esel HaChodesh, you have the 10th of the month, Yom Kippur. Correct? And the Torah continues, verse number 2, V'asisem oilo l'reich l'choyach l'Hashem, you're going to bring an offering. Par ben baka, you bring an offering of a bull, right? So bring an offering of a bull, and ayil, a ram, and kvas neshana, and 7 sheep, right? 7 sheep. So this is the mitzvah of the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, right? Go a little further. After all the holidays, let's go all the way in the book. It's chapter text 1b in the Chumash. Go to chapter 30. Chapter 30, the last verse of the Parsha. Chapter 30, verse 1. After God says all the holidays, from Rosh Hashanah and on, God says, "Vayemem Moshe al bnei Yisrael, kechol asher tziva Hashem es Moshe." And Moshe told the children of Israel whatever God commanded Moshe Rabbeinu. There's no Rashi on this, or there is a Rashi. The Rashi actually asked the general question, what is the meaning of this verse? And Moses told the children of Israel everything that God commanded. Who would ever think that Moses wouldn't tell the children of Israel? Would there be a doubt that Moshe Rabbeinu would keep a secret? What is the meaning of this verse? And Moses told the children of Israel everything that God commanded Moses. What is the meaning of this verse? And that's where Rashi comes to make a separation. But what is the meaning of the verse? Why would anybody think different that Moshe Rabbeinu would not tell the Jewish people?
That's a good point. Yeah.
And nothing is wasted.
Yeah.
Right? Why would we have to tell us? So sometimes you see that the Torah says that God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu tells it over to the Jews. You have these kind of expressions. Sometimes God tells Moshe Rabbeinu something, and you don't see that Moshe Rabbeinu repeats it to the Jewish people. We just had the story of Tzlafchad, the daughter of Tzlafchad. The daughter of Tzlafchad asked a question by God about their inheritance, right? And Moshe Rabbeinu asked God. He didn't know the answer to the question. Moshe Rabbeinu asked God, and God answers the question. It doesn't say after that, and Moshe Rabbeinu told it to the Jewish people. You don't have to tell us that Moshe Rabbeinu is going to tell this law to the Jewish. It's written in the Torah. It's self-understood. He's going to tell the law to the Jewish people. But think about a question in general. You ask a question. Is it important that the Jewish people know every law in the Torah? Is it important that we know every law? This is like the sacrificial offerings. Is it important? You're not a Kohen. I'm not a Kohen. Maybe somebody listening is not a Kohen. Why do you need to know the laws of the sacrificial offerings? You're never going to be a Kohen. Your children are not going to be a Kohen unless your daughter marries a Kohen. Your grandchildren might be Kohanim. But in general, is it important that, it's a general question, is it important that every law in the Torah is told to every Jew?
So.
Why? I'm not going to do these laws. Why even the Torah, like this week's portion, when I just ended off, the Torah says, and Moshe Rabbeinu told Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. Why was it important to tell Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel? And Moses told Aaron, Moses told the priest, the ones who were going to bring the carbon, this is what you got to do. Why did it say Bnei Yisrael to the entire Jewish people? Why was it important that the entire Jewish people would know this? But before we answer that question, let's continue. It's a fascinating, you'll see, I want you to have the Chumash. I want you to hold this place because we're going to go to Leviticus. We're going to go to we're going to go to Leviticus because Leviticus has the same law. If you go to Leviticus, in the book, it's on page number 4. It's text number 2. If you go to Leviticus, you have a Chumash, chapter 23. If you go to Leviticus chapter 23, in chapter 23 you have the same law. The same exact law in chapter 23. So you go to chapter 23, verse number 24. Are you with me?
Yeah, I just need the page number.
Chapter 23, verse number 24. You're going to see almost the same exact law. Chapter 23, verse number 24.
That's in
Page what?
Leviticus.
Leviticus,
Right here.
Oh.
page 800 in this book.
Oh.
Page 800. It says, again, Vayidab Hashem Moshe Lamer, Daber al Bnei Yisrael. God said to Moses, saying, speak to the Jewish people, to the children of Israel, B'chodesh Hashvi, on the 7th month, Be'echal HaChodesh, on the 1st of the month, Yeh Lechem Shabbos Zichrei Trua Mikra Kodesh, it should be a day of calling. Kol Meleches Avodah Leisasu, the 2nd verse, verse 25, only no work shall be done. Yikraftem Ishel Hashem, you shall bring a sacrifice. This is the same law that's in Bamidbar. Right? The same law. What's the difference between these two laws?
The blowing? Does it mention the blowing?
It does. Zichrei Trua. The blowing. So what's the difference between Leviticus chapter 23 and Deuteronomy chapter 29? The difference is in time. In Leviticus, it happened right after Mount Sinai. In Deuteronomy, in Numbers, it happened 40 years later. Right before Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. Before the Jews went into the land of Israel. What also is the difference? What else is the difference? Oh, in Numbers, it mentions all the sacrifices. It doesn't mention, per se, the law of not going to work. Right? It doesn't mention in Deuteronomy the law of not going to work. It does mention, no, it does say, but it mentions more the sacrificial offerings. It does say, no, I'm sorry. In chapter 29, verse number 1, it says, it more talks about the sacrificial offerings. Verse number 2, verse number 3, verse number 4, verse number 5. These are all the sacrificial offerings. Yeah?
It gives more detail.
More detail in the sacrifices. So in Numbers, it deals more with the sacrifice. In Leviticus, it deals more with the law of Rosh Hashanah. You should blow shofar, and you shouldn't work. So that's in text number 2, is Leviticus, right? We just read it. Let's go to text number 3. Again, text number 3 is going back to Numbers 28. Let's go text number 28, where God starts off all the laws of the holidays. All the laws of the holidays. Chapter number 28, verse number 1. This is on page 1060. It's in your student page, text number 3. This is where God starts off in this week's portion, all the laws of the holidays. Tzavis b'nei Yisrael, command the Jewish people, v'amayta aleim, and tell them, as karboni lachmi li'yishla erechem v'chay tishul li'lakel v'b'moyadei. This starts off all the sacrificial offerings from the daily sacrifice to all the sacrifice of the Rosh Chodesh to the sacrifices of the holidays. Over here again, the Torah says, command the children of Israel. Command the children of Israel about the sacrificial offerings. Why does the children of Israel need to know the sacrificial offerings? Why do the children of Israel, it should be the children of Aaron, who are important to know the sacrificial offerings? Why are the children of Israel obligated to know the sacrificial offerings? Yeah.
Because there's a lesson in everything.
Let's go first to the practical, to the simple meaning of to understand before we go to the spiritual. Let's go try to understand the practical implications of the parshas. So the truth is that the questions asked. So if you want to understand this, you have two different commands. One is about the law of the Leviticus is about the law of the holiday, and Numbers is about the sacrificial offerings of the holiday, right? Why do you separate these two? One was told 38 years ago, and one was told 38 years later. Right? Why do you separate the two commands? Were the two commands set together? Or were the two commands, let me finish my thought, were the two commands set separate? If the two commands were set separate, then your question that's come to your mind, how did the Kohanim know how to bring the sacrifices 38 years before? If the sacrifices are told 38 years later, in this week's portion, how does the Kohanim know how to bring the sacrifices 38 years before? Right? If Moshe Rabbeinu didn't tell the Jews, didn't tell the Kohanim how to bring sacrifices until 38 years later in this week's portion, how did the Kohanim know to bring sacrifices when in the book of Leviticus?
Because it was a different generation.
How did they know to bring sacrifices? So they didn't bring any sacrifices for 38 years. They didn't bring all these sacrifices on Rosh Hashanah. No, they did. Sure, they did. But the question is, if you go in the chronological order of the Torah, you go from the book of Leviticus to the book of Numbers, there's a 38-year difference. Why the first two? We need to have this separation of 38 years. We need to have the law in Leviticus, and then 38 years later, the law in Numbers, this week's portion. And number two is, how did they bring the carbon? How did they do the sacrificial offerings 38 years before? If the Torah, if Moshe Rabbeinu didn't tell them for 38 years how to bring the sacrifice.
So interesting.
So therefore you have to come to a rational conclusion that Moshe Rabbeinu did tell this portion 38 years ago. Moshe Rabbeinu did tell the Jew, Aaron and his brothers and his sons about how to do Rosh Hashanah 38 years ago, how to do Yom Kippur 38 years ago, how to do Rosh Chodesh 38 years ago. So then why is it written in this week's portion? If he told them 38 years ago, why did the Torah put it in this week's portion? Suddenly in Pinchas, we're holding Moshe Rabbeinu is going to die, and we're coming to the end of the journey of the Jewish people. Shalom Aleichem. The Torah tells us what the sacrifices of Rosh Hashanah was.
Generation, it'll keep going through every.
You could have said it 38 years ago and say every generation should keep going.
That's true.
What does that have to do with the 38 years that he had to separate between the?
Isn't it? Yeah, because Hashem told Moshe it's time to die now, right? In this parsha.
Right, so I understand. I agree with you. So therefore now he told them about the sacrifices. So he told them 38 years ago about the sacrifices. Now he remembers to remind them to put it in the Torah. It seems like there's some kind of a difference between the sacrifice, the Rosh Hashanah that's mentioned in Leviticus to the Rosh Hashanah that's mentioned in Numbers. And the difference is, we know the difference. The difference is that in Leviticus, it's about the law of Rosh Hashanah. In Numbers, it's about the sacrifice. So really, the Leviticus is to the Jewish nation. The one in Numbers, in this week's portion, is more to the Kohanim. How to bring a sacrifice, or what sacrifice they should bring. So really, the one in this week's portion is much more related to the priests. While the one in Leviticus is more related to the Jewish people. But that's not true. That's not true. Because you see openly, showed you openly, that it says there openly that talk to the entire Jewish nation. He starts off the portion with talk to the Jewish nation. He ends off the portion with talk to the Jewish nation. So it's not only to the it's not only to the priests, this portion. It's really to the Jewish nation. So then if it's to the Jewish nation, why didn't he say it to the Jewish nation when he spoke about the law to the Jewish nation in the book of Leviticus?
Oh, wow. Never thought about this before.
But,
exactly.
I can't lose my train of thought.
Yeah.
So therefore, the question you have to come to, this is a major question, because you find a lot of times in the Torah, this kind of saying it twice in 2 times in history, especially when it comes to sacrifices. You have in Vayikra, and you have in Bamidbar, as you just read. So therefore, there's a general rule. Text number 4. You have to have the book now. The Gemara is in the Gemara it says like Pida Torah al Seder Muktu b'Mocha b'Parshas Nemetchila Hikdima Mechares. That means the Torah is not particular about the chronological order of events. Events that are recorded earlier in the Torah were sometimes preceded by events that are recorded later. The Torah is not interested. Torah is not a book of history per se. And to make everything that works out, that it should work out in time-wise correctly. Torah is a book of laws. Torah is a book of a way of life. It's more important to the Torah, besides the law, especially in the chronological order, the more important the lesson that it wants to give out, than per se the timeline. And what do I mean by that? So, in text number 5, you have the famous Rabbi Yeshua Halevi, the Shnei Luchas Habris. He wrote a commentary on the Chumash writes. He writes that Torah is in perfect order. Not only from the mystical perspective in which the Torah is in its series of divine names and arranged according to the order of these names, so it has a mystical teaching, the Torah. According to Kabbalah, the Torah is if you know how to read the Torah, you can find in the Torah the letters, God's name repeated over and over. But it's also in its simple perspective. There is always a reason for the order in which the Torah is arranged. So even though that there is no order, but there's a reason to why there's a disorder.
Wow.
Never suppose that the Torah is out of order and that certain chapters should have appeared before or after the other chapter. Never, there's a reason. That means there's a reason why this week's Pasha suddenly comes back to the holidays. Even though he said it already 38 years before. There is a reason. Yeah? Never suppose that the Torah is out of order, that certain chapters should have appeared before and others than other chapters. Rather, everything is with perfect reason and is arranged in a proper order. Everything has its reason. So, for example, the famous example, I'm going to give you the example. The example is, if you go to the book of Genesis, it says, before Lech Lecha, at the end of Noach, before God tells Abraham to go out, to leave his father, it says, and Terach died. By Yamas Terach. And Terach died. And then God says to Abraham, go out. The truth is, Terach did not die then.
Yeah. Oh.
Terach did not die then. He died later. So, why does the Torah say that Abraham went out before Terach died, when we know in history that Terach did not die then? He lived many years after that. Why does the Torah say that Terach died? The answer is because God didn't want people should say that Abraham left his parents while he was alive. While his parents were alive. Abraham, the Abish, God wanted, he did what? But he did leave when his parents was alive. But the Torah didn't want that people say, Abraham, this pious, righteous person, would leave his elderly father in Haran while he packs his bags and goes to Israel. It doesn't look right. So therefore, the Torah says Terach died. But really he did not die.
The Torah shouldn't be deceiving.
Not deceiving. It's telling you he's following God's will. So when a situation, God asked him to leave. So he left.
He wasn't the only child.
What?
He wasn't his only.
Whatever, that's a different question. We're not going into the question, so why did he leave? The point is, as it says in text number 6, Rashi says, why did the Torah relate the terror passing before the Avram's departure when it didn't happen in that way? So there has to be a reason. What's the matter? You look lost.
No.
I'm text 6. I'm on text 6. You can. Oh, you can whisper. So the Rashi answers, least people say Avram neglected the commandment of honoring his father by leaving him in an old age and walking away. So therefore, Abraham had to leave. But instead of now having a debate like we're having right now, that how did Abraham leave with his father still alive? So the Torah says his father died. His father did die ultimately. Thus, it didn't happen exactly in that chronological order. So if you want to go in a real chronological order, it should have said Abraham went out, and then the next portion, Terach died. But the Torah puts the death of Terach before Abraham's leaving.
Because everything is imperfect.
Because the Abish has a reason.
Perfect.
There's a reason. There's a perfect reason. It's not just done because no reason, because the Torah is mixed up. There's a perfect reason why it says. Now you might agree, you might disagree, it's a separate, that's not the class over here to argue, should have Abraham left or shouldn't he, that's a separate discussion. The point is that there's a reason. There's a reason. I'm not going to the book of Genesis, Moshe. I'm not going back there. We'll have to wait till next year. What?
If he was
There's a reason. There's a reason he couldn't take it with him. No, because God says, Lech lecha, go away from your father's home. How can you take it with him?
His father.
He says, go away from your father's home. So you cannot go away. You can't take it with him.
Because he was an idol.
He's an idol worshiper. So God says, you got to leave him. But still, Abraham. And, until he left him with family. He didn't leave him high and dry. And Abraham left himself. But that's a separate discussion. The point is, you see that the Torah, when it, even though it's not in chronological order, doesn't. So in truth is, what is the point over here? That the truth is this week's portion was already said in the book of Leviticus. It was already said in the book of Leviticus. Even though it's written in this week's portion, it's already said in the book of Leviticus. Right? So that's the answering. That's the real answer. That even though in the book of Leviticus says the law to the Jewish people, and in this week's portion it says the law really to the Kahanim, but really this law was said in the book of Leviticus. At the time the book of Leviticus was written, when the Jewish people were on Mount Sinai when they built the temple. Why is it written here? Because there's no chronological order. There's a reason why it's written here. So really they came together. Right? The problem with this is the last verse of the Torah. The problem is the last verse. And Moshe Rabbeinu said all these things to the Jewish people. That, when you have that last verse, it takes apart this whole situation. Because that last verse tells us that no, that he told it to them right then and there. For some reason, if the Torah wouldn't have said that last verse, that verse 30, the last verse in the Parsha, then you could say that when it says Vayedaber, the first verse, and Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to all these things, that maybe he spoke about it also 38 years before. But now you have the last verse. Again. So this verse tells you that Moshe Rabbeinu said it right now. 38 years later, for some reason, Moshe Rabbeinu decided that it's now time to tell the Jewish people the sacrificial offerings. It's important to tell the Jewish people the sacrificial offerings. Not 38 years ago, but 38 years later. And not only to tell, so maybe he told the Kohanim 38 years ago. Could be. He probably did, because they had to bring the sacrifices. So I'm sure he told the Kohanim, the priests, how to do Rosh Hashanah, how to do Yom Kippur, how to do Pesach, how to do Sukkot. But he didn't tell the Jews. He only told the Jews 38 years ago about the law of blowing the shofar and not working. Over here, this week's parsha, we have that last verse. That last verse changes the whole concept. In essence, that last verse, suddenly at the end of the 38 years of the journey of the Jewish people in the desert, Moshe Rabbeinu turns around to the Jews and tells every Jew, not only the Kohanim, every single Jew, about these sacrificial offerings. The sacrifices of Rosh Hashanah, the sacrifices of Yom Kippur, the sacrifices of Sukkot, etc. Why? Why would Moshe Rabbeinu have to tell the Jews after 38 years journeying in the desert? He would have to ultimately say to the Jews again about the sacrificial offerings. Why to the Jewish nation? What was important? Why was so important to do that?
Because when you publicly get everyone involved, it pushes it preserves the information better.
But again, I'm sure they knew the sacrificial offerings. They've been bringing sacrifices for 38 years. They did the Rosh Hashanah for the last 38 years. They knew that. What do you mean? They were in the Beis Hamikdash. They saw the sacrifices, so they saw it. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu have to come now and tell the Jewish people, not the Kohanim, tell the Jewish people, you know what? I'm going to teach you the laws of the sacrifice. Well, what's important?
It involves everybody.
They were involved with it the last 38 years. So let's look at the Rebbe. Those that don't have a book, you'll have to listen to text number 7 of the Rebbe. So here that is where the Rebbe gets involved. So the Rebbe says that this Torah portion adds a new wrinkle. Instruct children of Israel and say to them. God instructed all the Jews to ensure that these offerings are brought at the right time. Bismanam, the Eibishter wanted that to emphasize that these sacrifices should be brought in its right, proper time. What to bring, I already said 38 years ago. I'm emphasizing, as you see in the first verse, as you see in the first verse of the entire sacrifices of this week's Pasha, it says right away, in verse chapter 28, verse number 1. Number 2, in its time. However, the details of the rules had already been presented to Moshe 40 years earlier. And he had conveyed them to the priest who are responsible for the offerings. They're doing it already for 38 years. But that they would have to do it in exact time, in its time. That in a way, if you don't do the sacrifice, the tamid we learned today in Chitas, if you don't do the tamid in the morning, you miss the day. You can't bring it again. You don't bring the Chodesh offering on its day, you can't fix it. The Eibishter wanted it to be in exactly its time. What's so important? What's so important in its time? What would you say?
It's the whole thing.
God is above time. What's so important that a sacrifice has to be brought in its time? Because that's God's will.
Yeah.
God, who's above time,
Yeah.
tells a Jew, I want you to bring, Rosh Hashanah is the first day of the month, the first month of the year. Pesach is the 14th to the 15th of the month. Rosh Chodesh is the 30th and the first of every, or it could be the first and the 30th of every month, the first of every month. That's doing the will of the Eibishter. That's doing the will of God. The Eibishter says, God says, I want you to bring a sacrifice every morning and every afternoon. I want you to daven Shachas and Mincha. Why? Because that's what the Eibishter wanted. B'mayadai. I don't want you to daven Shachas at night. I don't want you to daven Mincha. What's on prayer? Why can I pray? Whenever my heart desires. No, b'mayadai. The Eibishter says, I want you to bring the sacrifice in its time. That's my will. That's why in general it says by sacrifices, it says Reach Nechayach, it's a pleasing to God. Nachas Ruach, I have a great, today's Chita says, Nachas Ruach, I have a great delight. Shamarti, I've said, V'naseh Tzreini, and my will has been done. Specifically by sacrifice. Because in general we struggle with sacrifices. Jews struggle with all this blood and all this shechting and all these things. Right? It's not per se something that old Jews are excited about. Sacrifice. Vayikra is a tough, I don't know, to me it's not, but it's tough, even though I don't like blood.
Right.
But Vayikra is a tough portion by many people. Because it deals with sacrifices. It's almost, it's like almost like the Goyim took over, the nations of the world took over the sacrificial offering. This is a part of the Jewish people for thousands of years. And we pray to God that Mashiach comes, and we're going to build a temple, we're going to come back to sacrificial offerings. Why? Not because per se we, maybe I can figure out something, maybe I can come up with a different way to serve God. Prayer in the synagogue is less bloody. Giving a check is less, that's so graphical. But the Abishah says that's the beauty of the sacrifice. It's not only about you, it's not about you. It's what I want. Why do you want this? That's what I want. Don't ask me a question why I want something. If you want to serve me, this is what I want. And by you doing what I want, gives me a certain pleasure. It gives me a certain satisfaction in the aspect of the service of God. So you could serve God in essence in two ways. You could serve God for what you're going to get out of it. You can serve God because you want to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
We're here to serve.
No ulterior motives. No strings attached. No strings attached. So you can learn the Torah for the sake of knowing what to do, and you can learn the Torah because it is the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the will of God. It's fascinating that God wanted that every Jew should know every mitzvah in the Torah. You don't need to know every law. You don't need to know every law in American law. You're not obligated to know every law. You're not obligated to know any law. Go hire a lawyer when you got a problem. The Torah wants every Jew to know every mitzvah in the Torah. Whether he's obligated to do the mitzvah, whether he's not obligated to do the mitzvah. God wants every Jew to know every mitzvah in the Torah. That's why the Rebbe asked that every Jew should learn the Rambam. Because the Rambam, first of all, gives you every mitzvah in the Torah and explains to you every mitzvah in the Torah. Laws that you do and laws that you're never going to do. So even laws that you're never going to do, God wants you to know every single law. Why? Why does God want me to know laws that I'm never going to do? I'm not a Kohen. I'm never going to do the laws of a Kohen. What do I need to know it for?
It's the will of Hashem.
That's it. Because it's not, because the Eivishter, God wants you, the Torah is about, not only about laws of what to do and what not to do. The Torah is a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a relationship with God. God wants to have a relationship with you, and you should have a relationship with Him. You should know, He should know you, which He knows, and you should know everything that He wants. That's a true relationship between a human being and God. So if you take it as a book of laws, then I don't even know this law. I don't even know every law in the Torah. At this present time, we're in Galus. There's no Beis Hamikdash. We have to know every law in the Torah. We have to know sacrificial offerings. No, the whole Leviticus is not officially relevant today. We don't have a Beis Hamikdash. So why read it? Not only why read it, why comprehend it? We're learning it. Why comprehend it when it's not when it's seemingly not important? Yeah, it's not important. Maybe to doing it because you can't. You don't have a temple. But you're learning Torah for the sake of knowing the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the will of the Eibishter. And that's what is important. Moshe Rabbeinu comes at the end of his life to the Jewish people, and he tells them, "My dear friends, you're going into Israel. It's important you learn every single law of God, whether you're a Kohen, whether you're a Levi, whether you're a regular Jew. It's important you learn every law of the Torah. Not because you're going to do it or not going to do it, because it's the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it's the will of God. And the Eibishter wants, God wants, that you have this knowledge, that you have this relationship with Him, that you know everything that He wants. And nothing is missing out from that connection between me and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yeah. You wanted to say something? You wanted to ask him?
Maybe this is like a Mashiach kind of thought, but maybe in the tipping the scales and the more people that, because I find it very hard to comprehend when we read these long.
That's the point. It's not important to comprehend.
But maybe trying to understand them will bring upon, but the more people that try to...
I don't think the word is to comprehend. Some things I can comprehend, and some things are above my comprehension. I'm here just to connect. If I want a relationship with you, I don't always have to comprehend you. Maybe I don't comprehend you. I'll never figure you out. No, serious. I'm here to figure everybody out. I only can have a relationship that can figure you out. No, I have a relationship because I see the beauty in what you have. And I want to get to know you. And some things I will comprehend of you, and some things I will not comprehend. Some things I will like, maybe some things I won't. But if I want a relationship, I'm going to overlook those things that I don't. I mean, that's between me and a human being. I'm not talking to me and God. Yeah. But even between us and we're two human beings, you want to have a relationship. There's always things that we're not going to like. But see, if I want a relationship, I'm going to either have to overlook those things, or I'm going to have to accentuate the beauty of the good things. And if I can't do it, that'll be a struggling relationship. It's all based on if I want a relationship or not. That is really the question. Whenever two people are arguing, whenever you have a struggle, I always tell, I talk to a young couple getting married, Chas and Kal, I tell them, you should write down why you want to get married, right? Write down why, when you're in love right now, right? You're so excited. Write it down why you want to get married. Why are you getting married? Why? What do you love about him? What do you really love about him? And what do you love about her? What do you love? Write it down. Because one day you're gonna think, you might say to yourself, why do I love this person? Like, what happened? What, was I crazy? You were not crazy. You wrote it down, right? You wrote it down, right? Because there are things that connect. You want the relationship, and then sometimes you have to go back to that. Why do you want this relationship? So the basic principle of relationship, that we want the relationship. So is it with the Eibishter. The foundation between us and God is we want a relationship. I've said this many times. You had the you're not a Kohen, I'm not a Kohen either, Steve, so don't worry. So you have the relationship, you have the what do I want to say? I forgot what I wanted to say.
The relationship. Marriage.
Love and marriage. I forgot what I wanted to say. Okay, so let's go to text number 8. I'll come back to me in a second. When we study Torah to learn Torah how to perform a mitzvah, the learning is a preparation for a mitzvah. Except that the preparation is also a mitzvah. Then there's a higher form of Torah study. This is the idea of studying Torah for the sake of Torah itself. That's called in Hebrew, lishma. Lishma, for the sake of the reason, thing itself. This means to study Torah not to gain guidance, but because it's a book of divine wisdom. Better yet, because it's God's will. It's because of the will of the Eibishter. And if I have that basic principle in front of me, even though I need to learn to know what to do, But that's one aspect of learning. There's another concept of learning, and that is because I'm learning the Torah of the Eibishter. I thought the bracha that I make before learning Torah, I say, Asher bacha banu mikol ha'am v'nasal nas Torah. The Eibishter, God chose us from all the nations, and He gave us the Torah. He gave us this gift. He gave us this will. It's brought down that the first word in the Ten Commandments is Anoichi, I. It's an Egyptian word, Anoichi. But the Gemara says it stands for 4 words. Ana, Nafshi, Ksavis, Yahavis. I've said this many times. Ana, I. Nafshi, my soul. Ksavis, I've written. Yahavis, I've given to you. God says, I've given you my essence. What's the essence of a human being? His ratzin, his will. Right? Ratzin, will, is even higher than wisdom. That's what it says. Where a person's will is, that's where he's found. So when a person has a true ratzin, the Frierdiker Rebbe once asked, why does it take when a guy's a businessman, when he talks about his business, he's all excited. When he comes after the evening, he comes and opens the Gemara, he falls asleep. The Gemara is very deep reasoning. If it comes to his business, he has the time and the brains to analyze it and to figure it out and to explain it. When suddenly it comes to Gemara, which is the beauty, the wisdom of God, he puts him to sleep. The Gemara should wake him up. And the answer is because he has no will. He has a ratzin for business. He has a will, he has a desire to do his business. He doesn't have a ratzin to learn. So we learn out of necessity. We're learning because we need to learn. No. We should learn because this is the ratzin of the Eibishter. This is our true will. This is the will of God, which is our true will. So that's why the Rebbe says in text number 9, the meaning of the verse, the meaning of the verse, Savis b'nei Yisrael, command the Jewish people. In our instance, in this week's portion, where it says command the Jewish people, Ulav dakta karbonos is not only on the sacrificial offering, it's to Moshe's final declaration, call to all Jews to remain devoted to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This week's portion is more about the Moshe Rabbeinu as he comes to the end of his life to tell the Jewish people, don't give up. You need to connect to God. You need to always connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You need to learn Torah. Not to know what to do, but to have a relation with God. So it's a general command. To say it's specifically tell us about the karbanos that we know already. They've been doing karbanos 38 years. The Torah gave us an example why they say specifically of karbanos is because the Jewish people in general, 90% of them, more than 90% of them, didn't have to bring the karbanos. The Kohen brought the karbanos, the sacrificial offerings. So that's why it's emphasized on the karbanos, to tell the Jews, learn the karbanos. Learn the sacrificial offering. You're not obligated to do that. The Kohen's going to bring it. You're not responsible. It's the Kohen's responsibility. But it's your responsibility to learn Torah. Moshe, I'm knocking you out already.
No, I can tell he's thinking.
Oh, listen.
Yeah.
You're correct. And we cannot, that's why this is important. That's why this is in the portion of Pinchas. We need to be zealots in this aspect. We need to have zealousy in the aspect of learning Torah. To learn as much as we can. Because the more we learn Torah, not only to learn Torah, things that we need to know, and the things that are going to tell us what to do, learn Torah any way in any part of Torah. And it's more important to tell us this than to tell us this now than anything else. And that's why it's so important for Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, to tell the Jewish people this right before he's going to die. Because if you look in Devarim, he says openly, I know once I die, you're going to stray. So now we go, and this is also important to today. Today, how do we do this concept of karbanos today? How do we do this concept of sacrificial offering today? So davening, not only limud Torah, the importance of prayer. And prayer is a struggle by Jews. Prayer is not an easy thing. Especially to come and pray in shul with a minyan. It's not an easy thing to do. But here Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jewish people that it's important. Whether you think it's good, whether you think it's positive, whether you think it's going to help you or not, you need to connect to God through prayer. You need to come to shul. You need to do that. It's good for you, it's good for others. Moshe Rabbeinu is begging the Jewish people to make sure that they learn Torah and they connect to God through karbanos, through prayer. They don't stop to pray. And that's why he ends off the portion with the verse that Moshe Rabbeinu said to the Jewish people what God wanted him to say. Moshe Rabbeinu told the Jewish people now, at the end of 38 years. He made sure to tell them, don't forget to learn Torah, whether you understand it, whether it's connected to you, whether not, because it's the will of God, and to pray, to do karbanos, ma'aseh karbanos, b'moyadoi, in its time. So therefore the Medrash says in text number 10a, in your book number 10, if you don't have it, listen to me. The Medrash says, forgive all sins. Kol tise avan, teach us goodness, and let our lips replace the bull offerings. That's the power of prayer. The Jewish people said, Master of the universe, when the temple stood, we offered sacrifice to be forgiven. Now the temple is destroyed. All we can do is to pray. We don't have the sacrifices. We have the aspect of prayer. Ein biyadeinu ela tefillah, that we only have the concept of prayer. So the sacrifices continue. It continues through prayer, or, as in text number 10b, the Gemara says, you can do it in a different way. Rish Lakish said, what is the meaning of the verse? This is a Torah for a burnt offering, for a meal offering, for a sin offering, for a guilt offering. Why does it say this is the Torah? It should say this is the way you bring a sacrifice. What means this is a Torah? Those who study Torah are deemed to have brought a burnt offering, a meal offering, a sin offering, a guilt offering. You can learn, like it says, learn the laws of a chatas as you brought a sin offering. Learn the laws of an asham is like you brought an asham offering. Text number 10c, the Medrash says, one day Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai left Yerushalayim, followed by Rabbi Yeshua. They saw the temple lying in ruins. Rabbi Yeshua moaned, woe unto us! At the place of Israel's expiation. What's that right word?
Yeah, expiation.
Is lies in ruins. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai replied, my son, do not be distraught. An equivalent expiation remains to us. What is it? We have a way to forgiveness. Expiation is forgiveness. Right? How can we do forgiveness? I just looked at the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word is kapara, is forgiveness. How do we do forgiveness today? So he said, Zug bestow this aspect of kindness. So here, the Rebbe says there are three ways. Moshe Rabbeinu is telling us three ways: through learning Torah, through prayer, through acts of kindness. These are the three pillars that the world stands upon.
Can you? Oh, he has it.
Yeah?
The book you did.
We went to his gravesite.
I know, it rings a bell, Rabbi Yochanan.
Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is buried right by
Tiberius.
right by the Rambam.
We
Correct.
went to his gravesite at his kever. Remember here,
Right.
So now, we gave you the answer, the Rebbe gave us the answer of why this whole portion is written in such a fashion. First of all, it's to all the Jews. It's not only to Kohanim, it's to all the Jews. Every Jew is connected to this portion. And Moshe Rabbeinu emphasizes. Number two, learn Torah. You're right, these korbanos are not pertain to you. Not because we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, because you're not a Kohen. Doesn't make difference if you're a Kohen. Doesn't make difference if you have a Beis Hamikdash. Learn Torah because it's the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the will of God. Why? Because that connects you to God. That's the relationship. And especially through sacrifices. Especially through sacrifices. Because by learning sacrifices, the Gemara says you're forgiven. Number two is through prayer. So here, by learning this week's Pasha, hopefully will inspire you to come and daven. And ultimately, hopefully, it will inspire you at least to do Gemilas Chasadim. Acts of kindness. Yeah?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Now, the Rebbe goes a step further. And he says, look into the, let's see, there's a nuance in the difference of Vayikra and in the book of Leviticus and the book of Numbers. Okay? There's a little bit of a nuance difference in the book of Leviticus and the book of Numbers. So where's the book of Numbers? Vayikra. So in the book of Vayikra, you have it in front of you, if it's chapter 23, verse 44. In the book of Vayikra, where God talks about the laws of the sacrifice, of the laws of the holidays, in chapter 23, verse number 44, the Torah uses the word Vayedaber on page 804 in this book. Vayidaber Moshe es moyed Hashem al bnei Yisrael. And Moshe Rabbeinu spoke these holidays to the children of Israel. It's almost like the end of this week's Parsha. It's like the end, that Moshe Rabbeinu said it to them. Vayidaber Moshe. So after all the holidays in the book of Leviticus, in verse 44, it says, Vayidaber Moshe es moyed Hashem bnei Yisrael. What does it say at the end of our Parsha?
The difference is the word command.
The difference is the word Vayidaber and Vayomer. In this week's Parsha, at the end of the entire Parsha, page 1072, chapter 30, verse number 1, what does it say? Vayomer Moshe al bnei Yisrael. And Moses said to the Jewish people. In the book of Leviticus, after the holidays, it says he spoke to the Jewish people. And over here he said to the Jewish people. The difference between Vayidaber and Vayomer. What's the difference between Vayidaber and Vayomer? They're both he said. Moshe Rabbeinu told. Over here he translated Moshe Rabbeinu told. Moshe told. But there's a difference in Hebrew between Vayidaber and Vayomer. Vayidaber is more stricter, more aggressive. Vayomer is more nicely. Talk nicely.
But then it says
calmly. Vayomer is more expression of.
There is like more of a command.
So, Vayidaber. Also, the Yidaber is something that is continual speech. And Vayomer is more a one-time discussion. The Gemara goes into the difference of Vayidaber. So Vayidaber is strict speech. Vayomer is soft speech. So like in English, speaking to somebody or telling somebody. Vayidaber is telling somebody. Vayomer is speaking to somebody. Vayidaber means that it should be continual speak. And Vayomer, he said something. And he said something. It was a one-time saying. Here is the genius of the Rebbe. What's the difference between Leviticus and what's ultimately the difference between Leviticus and Numbers? Leviticus is the law of the holiday. Numbers is the sacrificial offerings of the holiday. Leviticus says, Vayidaber. Numbers says, Vayomer. Leviticus says Vayidaber is more stricter. Numbers says Vayomer is more softer. Leviticus is a continuous issue. Numbers is happens right now, saying right now, not that it's continuous. Why? Because the law of Rosh Hashanah in Leviticus is a continual situation, never stopped. Rosh Hashanah, after the destruction of the temple, continues to be Rosh Hashanah. Whether there's sacrifices, whether there's no sacrifices, the law of Rosh Hashanah to blow the shofar, not to do malacha, continues till today. Do you bring sacrifices on Rosh Hashanah? No. Do you bring sacrifices on Pesach? No, he continues till today. Vayidaber. Moshe Rabbeinu said that all these holidays will continue, whether you're going to bring sacrifices or not going to bring sacrifices. When it comes to sacrificial offerings in this week's portion, over here it says Vayomer. God pleads with a Jew to learn the sacrificial offerings. Not that you're going to bring the sacrificial offering. I'm pleading with you to have this relationship with you. I know you're not going to bring the sacrificial offerings because you don't have a Beis Hamikdash. But I'm pleading with you, even though you're not going to have a Beis Hamikdash, that you should learn the sacrificial offerings. That's why it says in this week's portion of Vayomer. And in the book of the Bamidbar, it says Vayidaber. And the book of Leviticus, it says Vayidaber. Did you get that?
Yeah, yeah.
But where is the word command? I see the word command.
That's a separate issue. Let's go one thing at a time. So look at the Rebbe says on page number 12, on text number 12, page 13. That ends this class. God asks us, look how the Rebbe says it so beautifully. God asks us daily to study the laws of the sacrifice. But while we are in exile, driven from our Father's table, God makes his request softly. A Jew can argue that if God wanted us to offer sacrifice, we are willing. Let God provide a temple, the priesthood, etc., and we'll offer the sacrifice. You want us to offer sacrifice? Build a Beis Hamikdash. If he's not prepared to do so, what we asked, we are not prepared to do what do you want? Why should we learn the sacrifice? You're not letting us build the Beis Hamikdash. So how can you ask us to do the sacrifices if we don't have a temple? He took it all away from us, our priests, our purity, our temple. As he said these words, the Rebbe cried bitterly. If he wants us to offer sacrifices, let him return them. If God wants us in this week's Parsha to bring sacrifices, so let him bring Mashiach. That's it. The Eibusher brings Mashiach. We'll build the Beis Hamikdash. We'll bring all the sacrifice. Which Jew doesn't want to bring a sacrifice? Hineni, I'm ready to bring a sacrifice. Therefore, the Eibusher says in this week's Parsha, Vayomer, God asks softly. He says, you're right. Even though you can't bring the sacrifice. There's no Beis Hamikdash. You can't bring a sacrifice. Why would you want to learn about the sacrifice if you cannot bring the sacrifice? I'm asking you to do that. When it comes to the book of Leviticus, God says, you got to keep Rosh Hashanah. You're not allowed to work on Rosh Hashanah. You have to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. It's a mitzvah. Does that do with a Beis Hamikdash? There's a mitzvah to keep Rosh Hashanah. There's a mitzvah to keep Yom Kippur. There's a mitzvah to keep Pesach and Sukkot and Shavuos. You're obligated to keep these holidays, whether you have a Beis Hamikdash or not. But here in this week's portion, when God asks us to bring sacrificial offerings on these holidays, we say, okay, God, you want us to bring sacrifices. I'm ready to bring a sacrifice. Let's go. You do yours, build the Beis Hamikdash, and I'll bring a sacrifice. So why are you demanding on something of me so why should I learn something that you're not allowing me to do? So therefore, this week's Parsha, it says Vayomer. God says Vayomer. He doesn't demand. He asks the Jew. He begs. He pleads with us to study the Torah laws about sacrifices. You're right. Even though right now, why should I ask you to learn the laws of sacrifice? You can't bring a sacrifice. Because I want the relationship with you. Because this law is a relationship. It's not only about the law of sacrifice. It's about the relationship, about the wisdom. It's the will of God. That's higher than the law. That's greater than the law. For if we do, the third temple, which is everlasting, will indeed be built. Our final redemption will be at hand with Mashiach, our righteous Redeemer, who will arrive imminently to redeem us and lead us with pride. That could be also why Moshe Rabbeinu begged the Jews to do this right before he died. Because he knew that the only one's going to be able to bring Mashiach is the Jewish nation. He's leaving the world. And the only way he's going to come back to the world again and he'll do the sacrifice, he'll be part of Eretz Yisrael, is only when Mashiach comes. So he begged the Jews. He begged the Jews, as God begs the Jews, Vayomer. That's what Vayomer Moshe el Bnei Yisrael. K'chol asher tziva Hashem, whatever God commanded. But he said it in the expression of Vayomer, so to say, pleading by the Jews, continue to learn the sacrifice, even in Galus. Continue to learn about the sacrifices. Continue to understand the sacrifice to the best of your ability. Even though you're not going to bring the sacrifice. Because you're going to want to connect HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by us warning and connecting to God will ultimately bring the ultimate redemption. And again, the building of the Beis Hamikdash, and actually Mitzshem bringing the sacrificial offerings in the Beis Hamikdash. What a beautiful sikha of the Rebbe on this week's Parsha. Beautiful, beautiful sikha. And Mitzshem will continue next week. Come back to Chabad. Next week we'll do it Thursday at 10 a.m. And we'll do the portion of the week. We'll start doing it in the daytime. Maybe it's too hard for people to come late at night to start learning.
Come by, it's plenty of room here.
There's not enough room here. We might have to make some extra room for you next week. But where there's love, there's room. I wish you all a wonderful and beautiful and happy and healthy day.